You've met someone new, maybe a coworker, a date, someone at a party who seemed charming, funny, a little too eager to impress, and something in your gut whispered, "Don't." You couldn't explain it, there was no evidence, nothing they said was technically wrong. But the feeling was there, quiet, persistent, impossible to shake. Now here's the question nobody asks. Where did that feeling come from? Because you didn't learn it. Nobody taught you a checklist for detecting untrustworthy people. No school class covered it. And yet the feeling arrived fully formed, confident, almost like it had been waiting. That feeling is ancient, older than writing, older than cities, older than farming. And for the version of you that lived 100,000 years ago, getting it wrong didn't mean an awkward friendship or a bad business deal. It meant dying. Imagine a world with no contracts, no courts, no reputation systems, no reviews, no background checks, no way to verify a single thing anyone told you. That was the world ancient humans actually lived in. A small band of people, maybe 20, maybe 40, moving through a landscape that was actively trying to kill them. And occasionally they'd encounter strangers, other groups, other faces they'd never seen before. Here's the strange part. Those strangers could be the most valuable thing in the world, or the most dangerous. A neighboring group might know where water was hiding in a drought. They might carry medicines, tools, information that could save your entire band's life. Or they might be competitors for the same scarce food source, and desperate enough to do something about it. Every encounter with an unknown person was a live calculation with no room for error. And they had none of the tools we rely on, no paperwork, no references, no social media profile to skim. They had to read the person standing in front of them, in real time, and make a call that could echo for generations. What most people don't realize is, they were extraordinary at it. Not because they were smarter, but because the ones who weren't good at it simply didn't survive long enough to pass their genes forward. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human brain was being quietly, ruthlessly selected for one specific skill: reading people. We are the descendants of the best trust detectors who ever lived. Which raises a genuinely uncomfortable question. If we're so good at this, why do we get it so wrong? Here's where things get interesting. Most of what your brain does when it evaluates a person happens entirely without your conscious involvement. You don't decide to assess someone, it just happens, automatically, instantly, beneath the level of thought. Psychologist Nalini Ambady did a study where she showed people 7-second clips of strangers, silent clips, no audio, just faces, body language, movement, and participants were asked to rate the person's trustworthiness. The ratings they gave in 7 seconds were remarkably consistent with ratings given after 30 minutes of conversation. 7 seconds, no words, and the gut was already there, already confident. Princeton psychologist Alex Todorov pushed it further. He found that people form trust impressions of a stranger's face in under 100 milliseconds, a tenth of a second. Before conscious thought can even form a sentence about what it's seeing, the brain has already rendered a verdict. Think about that for a moment. The most important social judgment a human can make, can I trust this person, happens faster than a camera shutter. Ancient humans didn't have the luxury of slow analysis. You see the stranger. You have 3 seconds to decide if this interaction is going to go well or not, because 3 seconds was sometimes all there was. But here's the catch, and this is the part that should genuinely make you pause. The system is ancient, which means it was calibrated for an ancient world, and that world looked nothing like ours. In the ancestral environment, someone who looked like a member of your group probably was. Someone who moved with ease in your social context probably belonged there. The shortcuts the brain used were rough, but they worked well enough in a world where the population was small, the social circles overlapped, and familiarity usually meant safety. We don't live in that world anymore, and our trust detection system hasn't caught up. Ancient humans weren't just using split-second gut reactions. They had something else, something slower, deeper, and arguably more sophisticated than anything we've built to replace it. They knew everyone, not just their names, not just their faces, they knew their history. In a band of 30 people who've lived together for years, you don't need to guess whether someone is trustworthy. You've watched them, in crisis and in comfort, in scarcity and in abundance. You know how they behaved when food was scarce last winter. You know who they stood up for and who they abandoned. You know what their word has been worth, across dozens of situations, over years of shared life. Anthropologists call this reputation tracking, and it appears to be one of the oldest and most powerful social technologies humans ever developed. Long before we had courts or contracts, we had memory and gossip. Gossip, by the way, is not what you think it is. In most modern contexts, gossip sounds like a guilty pleasure, trivial, petty, the kind of thing people apologize for doing. But evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar's research suggests that gossip, social information sharing about who did what and why, makes up somewhere around 65% of adult human conversation across cultures. That's not a character flaw, that's a system. Gossip was the original reputation database. It was how ancient humans pooled information. If you encountered a stranger that someone in your group had interacted with before, you didn't have to start from zero. You consulted the network, you checked the record. Someone in your band had already run the experiment for you. Reputation spread through gossip the way news spreads through social media now, except the stakes were higher. And the accuracy had to be, too, because in a small group where everyone's life was connected to everyone else's, a false reputation, in either direction, could destabilize the entire social fabric. Imagine living in a world where what you said about someone actually mattered, where a single lie, detected, could mark you permanently in the only social circle you'd ever have. There was no moving cities, no fresh start, no deleting your account. You lived with what you'd built and what others had seen you build. That accountability created honesty, not because people were more virtuous, but because the cost of being caught in a deception was catastrophic in a way we can barely conceive of today. We invented something extraordinary to escape all of that. Contracts, legal systems, credit scores, online reviews, formal institutions designed specifically to make trust a transaction rather than a relationship. And it worked, spectacularly. We can now do business with strangers on the other side of the planet. We can coordinate with people we'll never meet. We built global supply chains on the assumption that most parties will behave reliably, backed by legal enforcement rather than personal reputation. But something happened in the trade. We outsourced the human part. We stopped building the slow, deep, real knowledge of people that our ancestors carried constantly. Why would you spend years learning who someone truly is when a credit check takes 45 seconds? Why maintain a reputation in a community when you can just move to another city or start a new account? And now we find ourselves in a strange position. We have more ways to verify information about strangers than ever before in human history. And trust, in institutions, in each other, in neighbors, in governments, is at historic lows in almost every country measured. The ancient detection system is still running, still looking for what it was trained to find. Consistent behavior, social accountability, reputation built over time through shared experience, and it's not finding it, not in the way it needs to. So here's the thought that stays with me after all of this. Maybe trust was never really about reading strange correctly. Maybe it was always about becoming the kind of person and building the kind of community where strangers don't have to remain strangers for long. The ancient humans didn't just detect trust, they created the conditions where trust could grow. And maybe the most modern thing we could do, in a world drowning in information and starving for connection, is figure out how to do that again.